The red dust of the Arizona Territory hung in the air like a curse, coating everything in its path with a fine layer of grit that no amount of scrubbing could remove. It was the summer of 1878, and the drought had stretched on for 3 months, turning the already harsh landscape into a furnace that tested the will of every living thing foolish enough to call this place home. Chayton Tobai stood at the edge of Blue Mesa, his dark eyes scanning the horizon where heat mirages danced like spirits. The Navajo warrior's weathered face showed no emotion, but his jaw tightened as he watched the dust cloud rising in the distance. Wagons. More settlers coming to stake their claim on land that had known his people's footsteps for generations. He adjusted the rifle slung across his back, a Winchester he'd traded for 2 seasons ago, and turned to descend the rocky slope. His moccasins made no sound on the sun-baked earth as he moved with the fluid grace of one who had learned to hunt before he could properly walk. At 32 winters, Chayton had seen enough bloodshed to last several lifetimes. The smallpox that had swept through his clan 5 years ago had taken his wife and infant son, leaving him with a grief that had hardened into purpose: protect what remained of the Dina, their sheep, and most importantly, their access to water. 20 miles south, in the ramshackle settlement of Juniper Falls, Eliza Whitmore wiped the sweat from her brow as she helped her father plane a board for the new saloon doors. At 24, she had her mother's delicate features, but her father's sturdy hands and determined spirit. Her auburn hair, usually neat despite the frontier conditions, had escaped its pins in the heat, framing a face marked by intelligence and a stubborn set to her chin. "Hold it steady, Lizzie." Thomas Whitmore grunted, his own face red with exertion. The widower had brought his daughter west 3 years ago, chasing opportunities that the depleted farmlands of Ohio could no longer provide. They'd built a modest life here, Thomas's carpentry skills keeping them fed and sheltered, but barely more than that. "Pa, did you hear what they're saying at Murphy's store?" Eliza asked, keeping her voice low, though no one was near their workshop. "About the Navajo stealing cattle." Thomas's plane stuttered mid-stroke. "Don't go repeating gossip, girl. We've got enough troubles without borrowing more." But Eliza had inherited more than her father's hands. She'd gotten his sense of justice, too, though he'd tried to temper it with frontier pragmatism. "It doesn't make sense. Pa, why would they steal cattle when they have sheep? And why now, when everyone's struggling with the drought?" "Because Silas Rourke says so, and he's got the ear of Colonel Morrison at the fort," Thomas replied, his voice bitter. "Man like Rourke doesn't need truth when he's got power." Silas Rourke. The name tasted like alkali dust in Eliza's mouth. The land speculator and cattle baron had arrived in Juniper Falls 2 years ago with deep pockets and deeper ambitions. He'd bought up failed homesteads and water rights with the patience of a vulture, always there with an offer when desperate families had no choice but to sell. The morning's work was interrupted by the sound of commotion from the town's main street. Eliza and her father exchanged glances before setting down their tools and stepping outside. A crowd had gathered near the weekly market, voices raised in anger and fear. "Saw them with my own eyes." A man Eliza recognized as Carl Hensley, one of Rourke's ranch hands, was gesturing wildly, bold as brass, driving off 6 head of prime beef. Which direction did they go? This from Rourke himself, sitting atop his black stallion like a general surveying troops. He cut an imposing figure in his tailored coat despite the heat, his silver-streaked beard perfectly groomed. North toward Blue Mesa. Eliza's stomach churned. She'd learned enough about the territory to know that Blue Mesa held one of the few reliable water sources in 50 miles, a series of natural springs that had sustained the Navajo flocks for countless generations. The crowd's mood grew uglier by the minute. Someone shouted about teaching those savages a lesson. Another voice called for the cavalry. Eliza noticed movement near the covered wagons at the market's edge and saw a flash of color, a young Navajo boy, perhaps 10 years old, crouched behind a water barrel, eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, Eliza moved. She'd taken 3 steps toward the boy when chaos erupted. Someone had spotted him too, shouting, "There's one of them now!" The mob surged forward like a flash flood. The boy tried to run, but tripped over a rope as he scrambled to his feet. Carl Hensley's boot caught him in the ribs, sending him sprawling. The child cried out a sound that cut through the shouting like a blade. "Stop!" Eliza pushed through the crowd, her father's warnings forgotten. She reached the boy just as Hensley raised his fist again. "He's just a child." "Get out of the way, woman," Hensley snarled. "This little thief." "He's stolen nothing." Eliza positioned herself between the man and the boy, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Look at him. He came to trade. Same as anyone. See the rabbit pelts on his belt." The crowd hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, Eliza heard herself speaking words she'd learned from Sister Catherine at the mission school in Ohio, where an old Navajo woman had worked in the kitchens. "Altse hastin, altse asa." First man, first woman. A clumsy attempt at a greeting, but it made the boy's eyes widen in surprise. "You speak their heathen tongue," Rourke's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. He'd dismounted and now stood before her, his pale eyes cold as winter steel. "How interesting." Eliza lifted her chin. "I speak enough to know this child means no harm, and I know enough law to know that beating him would be assault, witnessed by half the town." The land baron's smile was thin as paper. "You're Thomas Whitmore's girl, aren't you, the carpenter's daughter who thinks she's too good for honest work at my establishment?" He'd offered her a position keeping books at his land office, an offer that came with implications that had made her skin crawl. She'd refused politely but firmly, earning his displeasure. "I have honest work already. Mr. Rourke." "Indeed." His gaze swept over her, then to the Navajo boy who clutched his ribs, breath coming in short gasps. "Take the boy and go, but mark my words. Miss Whitmore, those who side with thieves often find themselves sharing their fate." The crowd began to disperse, disappointed at being denied their sport. Eliza helped the boy to his feet, noticing how he flinched from her touch despite her gentle hands. She pulled a clean handkerchief from her pocket, one of the few fine things she still owned from Ohio, and pressed it to a cut on his forehead. "Eh," the boy whispered. "Thank you." From a bluff overlooking the town, Chayton watched the scene unfold through the army field glasses he'd salvaged from an abandoned wagon. He'd been tracking the boy, his sister's son, who'd slipped away from the trading party despite strict orders to stay put. His finger had moved to his rifle when the mob gathered, though he knew firing would bring the soldiers and seal his people's fate. Then the red-haired woman had intervened. Chayton found himself leaning forward, studying her face through the lenses. He'd seen courage before, but rarely from one of the wooden fence people, as his grandmother called the settlers. And when she spoke, however badly, in the Dainbizad, the sacred language, his worldview shifted slightly, like a pebble disturbing still water. He watched her help young Ashki Yazi to safety, saw her tear a strip from her own petticoat to bind his ribs when she thought no one was looking. The woman's father had appeared by then, face tight with worry, ushering them both into their workshop despite the obvious risks. Chayton lowered the field glasses. Below, Silas Rourke was gathering his men, gesturing toward the fort. The warrior didn't need to hear the words to know what came next. Accusations, demands for military action, the slow grinding wheel of injustice that crushed all in its path. But something else had been set in motion today. Chayton turned his horse north, toward the hidden camps where the elders waited for his report. He would tell them about the stolen cattle that no one had actually seen, about the violence barely averted, about the need to protect their water at all costs. He would not mention the woman with hair like autumn grass, who spoke the sacred language with the accent of a child. That detail, Chayton decided, he would keep to himself, for now. As the sun reached its brutal zenith, painting the desert in shades of orange and pain, 3 lives had intersected at angles none of them could yet comprehend. The boy, Ashki Yazi would carry the blue cloth torn from Eliza's petticoat as a talisman, proof that not all wooden fence people were enemies. Eliza would lie awake that night wondering if she'd signed her own death warrant by defying Silas Rourke so publicly. And Chayton would stand guard at Blue Mesa, knowing that the real battle for water and survival was only beginning. The red dust continued to blow, carrying whispers of conflict across the desert. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the sacred mountains, but they would not bring rain. Not yet. First would come the thunder of hooves, the crack of rifles, and the testing of souls in the crucible of the American frontier. None of them knew that within a moon's turning, their fates would be bound together by threads stronger than sinew, in ways that would challenge everything they believed about enemy and ally, duty and desire, justice and survival in a land that recognized only one law: the strong take what they can, and the wise protect what they must. The red dust settled on everything equally, on Navajo wool and settler cotton, on righteous and wicked alike, patient as death and twice as certain. The moon hung like a silver dollar over Blue Mesa when the first shots rang out. Chayton had been expecting them for 3 days, ever since the incident at the market. What he hadn't expected was the calculated brutality of what followed. He found the bodies at dawn, 2 of Rourke's own ranch hands, shot in the back, their cattle scattered across the canyon floor. But it was the evidence planted nearby that made his blood run cold: a Navajo blanket, distinctive in its pattern, and shell casings from an old Springfield rifle, the kind his people had carried 20 years ago. "This is wrong," muttered Nalnish, his cousin who rode beside him. "These men died hours ago, but the blanket shows no blood, no dust. It was placed here." Chayton dismounted, studying the scene with the eye of one who had tracked game across these lands since childhood. The boot prints were wrong too deep, made by men carrying extra weight. The angle of the shot suggested the killers had been on horseback, firing down. His people fought on foot when they could, using the terrain for advantage. "Ride back," he told Nalnish. "Tell the elders what we've found. They need to prepare for what's coming." By noon, Juniper Falls was in uproar. Silas Rourke stood on the porch of Murphy's store, his voice carrying across the packed street. 2 good men murdered, butchered by savages who grow bolder by the day. First our cattle, now our people. When will it end? Eliza pressed against the wall of her father's workshop, listening to the mob's anger build like a summer storm. Her father had forbidden her from going outside, but she could hear everything through the thin walls. "The army will do nothing," Rourke continued. "Colonel Morrison hides behind regulations while our friends lie dead. Are we not men? Can we not defend ourselves?" The crowd roared approval. Through a crack in the wall, Eliza saw Carl Hensley holding up the blood-stained blanket like a battle flag. Something about the scene troubled her, the same instinct that had driven her to protect the Navajo boy 3 days earlier. "I say we ride to Blue Mesa tonight," someone shouted. "Burn them out before they kill again, and start a war." This from an unexpected source: Samuel Mason, a young sergeant from the fort who often came to town for supplies. He pushed through the crowd, his uniform dust-covered from hard riding. "You take justice into your own hands. You'll have the whole Navajo nation coming down on this settlement." Rourke's eyes narrowed. "Then what do you propose, Sergeant? That we wait for more deaths?" "I propose we follow the law. The army will investigate." "The army couldn't find water if they were drowning in it," Hensley spat. "We know where these killers hide. Blue Mesa's been their stronghold for generations." Mason interrupted. "Long before any of us set foot in this territory. You want to attack their water source during a drought, might as well declare war on every native tribe from here to California." The crowd muttered, torn between bloodlust and fear. Eliza noticed how Rourke's jaw tightened at the mention of Blue Mesa's water. Something flickered in his pale eyes: calculation, perhaps, or satisfaction. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the desert, Eliza made a decision that would have horrified her father. She saddled their old mare, Buttercup, and rode toward the dry creek bed where she'd sometimes seen Navajo women gathering herbs. It was foolish, possibly fatal, but her conscience wouldn't let her rest. She didn't have to wait long, as if materializing from the stone itself. Chayton appeared on the opposite bank, rifle ready but not aimed. They regarded each other across the sandy channel, neither speaking for long moments. "You should not be here," he said finally, his English careful but clear. "Those men, Rourke's men, it wasn't your people who killed them." His dark eyes studied her with an intensity that made her grip the reins tighter. "You know this?" "I know Silas Rourke. I know he wants something, and he'll spill blood to get it." She reached into her saddlebag, producing something wrapped in cloth. "The boy I helped, is he well?" Chayton's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Ashki Yazi heals. He speaks of the Bilagana woman who knows our words." "I know perhaps 10 words, poorly spoken." Eliza unwrapped the bundle medical supplies she'd gathered. "There will be violence. These might help." He crossed the creek bed in 3 swift strides, stopping just outside of arm's reach, up close. She could see the weight of responsibility etched in the lines around his eyes, the careful way he moved like a man always ready for an attack. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because someone has to build bridges instead of burning them." She held out the supplies. "Because I've seen what fear and lies can do to good people." He accepted the bundle, his fingers briefly brushing hers. "You risk much. Your people will not forgive this." "They're not all my people. Some came here for a new life. Others came to take lives." She met his gaze. "I won't stand by while innocent blood is spilled." "Blood has already been spilled. More will follow." "Then help me prevent it. Tell me what Rourke really wants." Chayton was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Water, always water. Blue Mesa Springs could irrigate 1,000 acres. Support 10 times the cattle this land holds now. But the treaty." "Treaties can be broken if you make the other side seem savage enough." The pieces clicked into place in Eliza's mind. "He's creating a war to steal your water rights." "You see clearly for one of the wooden fence people." Despite everything, she almost smiled. "We have names, you know. Mine is Eliza." "I know your name." He shouldered his rifle. "Return to your home. Eliza Whitmore, forget what you think you know. This is not your fight. It became my fight the moment I stood between Hensley and that boy." "Then you are a fool." "Perhaps, but I'm a fool who's right." Something shifted in his expression, respect, perhaps, or resignation. "There is an old cottonwood tree, split by lightning, 2 miles north of here. If you must send word, leave it there. But know this, I cannot protect you from what's coming." "I'm not asking for protection. I'm offering help." He turned to leave, then paused. "The blue cloth you gave Ashki Yazi, he wears it as a warrior would wear an honor mark." Then he was gone, melting back into the landscape as if he'd never been. Eliza sat on Buttercup for several minutes, heart pounding, wondering if she'd just signed her own death warrant or taken the first step toward preventing a massacre. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the riders approaching from the west, 6 men, moving fast and low in their saddles. She recognized Hensley's distinctive hat and quickly guided Buttercup behind a cluster of mesquite. The men passed within 50 feet of her hiding spot, close enough for her to hear Hensley curse about the empty-handed fools at the fort. They were heading toward Blue Mesa, but not by the main trail. They were taking the old mining road, the one that curved around the back of the springs. Eliza waited until they were well past before turning Buttercup toward home. She had to warn someone, but who the army wouldn't listen to a woman's concerns. Her father would lock her in the root cellar before letting her get more involved. That left only one option, dangerous as it was. She rode hard for the lightning-struck cottonwood, using a charcoal pencil to scrawl a quick message on a piece of brown paper, 6 riders, mining road, tonight, not official. She wedged the paper into the split trunk and rode away, praying she wasn't already too late. At Blue Mesa, Chayton found the message as the last light faded from the sky. He read it twice, then burned it. The woman Eliza had courage, but courage could get people killed as easily as cowardice. He gathered the warriors quickly. They knew the mining road, knew its blind turns and narrow passages. If riders came that way at night, they came for ambush, not negotiation. We could stop them, Nulnish suggested. Send their bodies back as a warning. And prove we are the savages they name us. Chayton shook his head. No, we watch. We defend if attacked. But we do not strike first. They took positions among the rocks, shadows among shadows. An hour passed, then two. Just when Chayton began to wonder if the warning had been false, he heard them horses trying to move quietly, the clink of metal on stone. The riders appeared around the bend, exactly 6 as promised. They carried torches, unlit but ready. In the moonlight, Chayton could see bundles strapped to their saddles, something that gleamed like glass bottles. Coal oil. They'd come to burn the camp. Chayton raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel at the lead rider. One shot would scatter them, but it would also start the very war Rourke wanted. He held his breath, finger on the trigger, waiting. Then one of the horses Hensley's mount stepped wrong on the loose shale. The animal screamed, going down hard, throwing its rider into the rocks. The other men cursed, wheeling their mounts around. In the confusion, one of the coal oil bottles broke, its sharp petroleum smell filling the air. "Indians!" someone shouted. Though no one had shown themselves, panic took hold. The riders fired wildly into the darkness, their muzzle flashes destroying their night vision. They retreated in disorder, leaving Hensley groaning among the rocks. Chayton waited until the hoofbeats faded before emerging. Hensley lay twisted, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. The man's eyes went wide with terror when he saw the warriors surrounding him. "Please," he gasped. "Please don't." "We are not what you name us," Chayton said quietly. He knelt, examining the injury with surprisingly gentle hands. "The bone is broken. You need a doctor." They made a travois from blankets and poles, securing Hensley despite his whimpers of pain. As dawn broke, they delivered him to the edge of Juniper Falls, where early risers found him babbling about Navajo, who had saved his life instead of taking it. But Silas Rourke was already spinning the story differently. By the time Eliza heard the news, it had become a tale of savage attack, of poor Hensley barely escaping with his life, of the need for decisive action before they all met similar fates. Standing in her father's workshop, listening to the town's anger build toward its inevitable conclusion, Eliza realized that her warning had only delayed the explosion. The fuse was lit, burning steadily toward a confrontation that would drench the red earth in blood, unless someone found a way to cut that fuse. And as she met the frightened eyes of young Ashki Yazi, who had crept to their back door seeking news of his Uncle Chayton, Eliza knew that someone would have to be her. The red dust swirled outside, carrying the scent of coming violence, but also, perhaps, the faintest hope for something else understanding. Justice, even peace, if only someone was brave enough, or foolish enough, to reach for it. The proposal came at gunpoint, though not in the way Eliza might have imagined a week earlier. She'd been hauling water from the well behind Murphy's store when Rourke's men surrounded her 5 riders, forming a loose circle, their intentions clear in their sun-hardened faces. Carl Hensley wasn't among them. He still lay in Doc Weatherby's care, raving about Navajo kindness in his delirium, much to Rourke's fury. "Miss Whitmore," drawled Jake Colton, Rourke's new foreman. "Mr. Rourke requires your presence. Immediately." "I'm sure, Mr. Rourke can wait until I've finished my chores," Eliza replied, continuing to work the pump handle despite her trembling hands. Colton dismounted, his spurs ringing against the packed earth. "Wasn't a request, ma'am." The ride to Rourke's compound took 20 minutes, long enough for Eliza to consider and discard a dozen escape plans. The Double R Ranch sprawled across a valley that had once held a seasonal lake. its grand house incongruous against the harsh landscape. Armed men patrolled the grounds, more like a military camp than a cattle operation. Rourke waited in his study, a room that spoke of Eastern wealth transplanted to Western soil. He didn't look up from his ledgers when she was escorted in. "Miss Whitmore, you've been busy these past days, meeting with savages, spreading sedition, undermining the rightful order of this territory. I've been preventing bloodshed, Mr. Rourke, something you seem determined to cause." He finally raised his eyes, and she saw calculation there, cold as a banker foreclosing on a widow. "Bloodshed is coming regardless. The question is, which side will you be on when it arrives?" "The side of justice." His laugh was humorless. "Justice! How charmingly naive." He stood, moving to a map that dominated one wall, the territory marked with red X's over Navajo settlements and blue circles around water sources. "Let me educate you about justice, Miss Whitmore. Justice is what the strong decide it is, and I am very, very strong." "You're a murderer. You killed your own men to start a war." "Prove it." His smile was thin. "Oh, but you can't, because who would believe the word of a woman who consorts with savages, especially after tomorrow, when the good citizens of Juniper Falls learn about your midnight rides to meet with their enemies?" Eliza's blood chilled. He'd been having her watched. "However," Rourke continued, returning to his desk, "I am a reasonable man. I believe in offering choices, even to foolish young women. So here is yours tomorrow. Colonel Morrison will receive evidence that you've been passing information to the Navajo, helping them evade justice for their crimes. You'll hang as a traitor, unless you marry someone of my choosing. Someone whose reputation will shield you from accusations. Someone who can keep you controlled." The room seemed to spin. "You're insane." "I'm practical. You've made yourself a problem, Miss Whitmore. This solution eliminates that problem while serving other purposes." He pulled out a document. "One of my business associates from Texas arrives tomorrow. Augustus Brennan, a widower in need of a wife for his political ambitions. You'll make an acceptable choice." "I'll die first." "No, your father will die first. Accidents happen so easily in a carpenter's shop. Then you'll hang, and then, with no voices raised in protest, I'll take Blue Mesa and every drop of water it holds." Eliza stared at him, seeing the truth in his pale eyes. He would do exactly as he threatened. "You've thought of everything." "I always do. You have until dawn to decide. My men will escort you home to... Consider your options." The ride back to Juniper Falls passed in a blur. Eliza's mind raced, searching for alternatives, finding none. She couldn't run, they'd kill her father. She couldn't fight, she had no allies powerful enough to stand against Rourke. She couldn't even warn Chayton, the lightning-struck Cottonwood was surely watched now. But as they passed the mission ruins at the edge of town, inspiration struck like summer lightning. That night, as Rourke's guards watched the front of the workshop, Eliza slipped out through a loose board in the back wall. She made her way to the abandoned mission, where Sister Catherine had once taught her those few words of Navajo. The bell tower still stood, and more importantly, the old signal mirror remained placed there by the Spanish to communicate with their outposts. She climbed carefully, her skirts catching on the rotted ladder rungs. At the top, she angled the mirror to catch the moon's light, flashing a pattern toward Blue Mesa. 3 long, 3 short, 3 long, the universal distress signal that even frontier children knew. She repeated it for an hour, arms aching, hope fading. Then, just as she was about to give up, an answering flash came from the darkness. Once, twice, message received. Dawn came too soon. Colton arrived with a closed carriage, his expression making it clear that her time for choosing had ended. Eliza kissed her father goodbye, unable to explain why her embrace lingered so long. "Just repairs at the Rourke place," she lied. "I'll be back by evening." Thomas Whitmore watched the carriage leave, unease etched in every line of his weathered face. At the Double R, Augustus Brennan proved to be everything Eliza had feared, a soft-bodied man of 50, with hands that lingered too long in greeting and eyes that evaluated her like livestock. Rourke had gathered witnesses the territorial judge deeply in debt to Rourke's bank, the Methodist minister whose church Rourke had donated to, and a handful of prominent citizens who wouldn't dare refuse the invitation. A sudden romance. Rourke announced to the assembled group, "Mr. Brennan was quite taken with Miss Whitmore's spirit during his last visit. Haven't you, Augustus?" Brennan's smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. Indeed, such fire needs proper guidance. Eliza stood frozen as the minister opened his prayer book. This couldn't be happening. Not in America, not in 1878, yet here she was, about to be sold like property to protect her father and prevent a war. "Dearly beloved," the study window exploded in a shower of glass. Armed men poured through, not shooting, but taking positions with military precision. Chayton entered last, his face painted for war, rifle steady on Rourke's chest. "This woman is under the protection of the Dean," he announced in perfect English, "by the Treaty of Bosque Redondo. Interference with those granted sanctuary by our tribe is an act of war." Rourke's face purpled. "She's not Navajo, you have no claim. She spoke our language in peace. She aided our children. She warned us of night riders." Chayton's dark eyes never left Rourke. "The council has spoken. She is Nilchi Biazi, daughter of the wind. To force her into marriage is to declare war on every clan from here to the sacred mountains." "This is preposterous," Judge Harrick blustered. "You can't simply—" "We can and we have." This from the doorway, where Colonel Morrison himself stood, looking deeply unhappy but resolute. Behind him, Sergeant Mason and a squad of soldiers filled the hallway. "I've just received word from Fort Defiance. The Navajo claims are legitimate under treaty law. Any forced marriage of someone under tribal protection would constitute a violation of federal treaty." Eliza felt her knees weaken. The signal someone had ridden through the night to the fort, presenting her case in terms the army couldn't ignore. "This is conspiracy," Rourke snarled. "She's no more Navajo than—" "Then your dead ranch hands were cattle thieves." Chayton's voice was soft, dangerous. "We know who killed them. Rourke, we have witnesses. Your own man, Hensley, in his fever, has spoken many truths." The room went deadly still. Rourke's hand inched toward his desk drawer, but froze as a dozen rifles swung his way. "However," Chayton continued, "bloodshed serves no one. The council offers another way. The woman will choose her own path if she accepts our protection. She comes with us now. If she refuses," he shrugged, "then she is yours to do with as you will." All eyes turned to Eliza. She looked at her choices, Brennan's sweaty anticipation, Rourke's cold fury, the unknown fate that awaited her among the Navajo. It was no choice at all. "I accept the protection of the Dine," she said clearly. "Then it's settled." Colonel Morrison looked relieved. "Miss Whitmore will accompany the Navajo delegation. Any interference will be met with the full force of federal law." "This isn't over," Rourke promised, his voice low and venomous. "Not by half." Chayton smiled a warrior's smile that promised consequences. "No, it's just beginning." They rode out in a strange procession, Navajo warriors, one white woman, and a military escort to the territorial boundary. Eliza rode beside Chayton, acutely aware of the bridge she'd just burned, the life she'd left behind. "What happens now?" she asked as Juniper Falls disappeared behind them. "Now you learn what protection truly means," he replied, "and what price it carries. I notice you didn't mention that my protection requires marriage, according to your customs." His glance was sharp. "You knew." "Sister Catherine taught me more than words. She spoke of the binding ceremonies, how outsiders could be brought into the tribe through marriage bonds." Eliza met his gaze steadily. "You're saving my life by making me your wife. A wife in name and law only." "I will not." He paused, choosing words carefully. "You will be protected, not possessed. This I swear. And if I refuse, then we return you to Rourke before the sun sets." His expression softened slightly. "But I think you are too wise for that. Eliza Whitmore." She looked back once more at the world she was leaving her father, her home, everything familiar. Then she faced forward, toward the red rocks and uncertain future. "Then I suppose we should discuss terms," she said with a courage she didn't feel. "After all, a contract marriage still requires negotiation." Chayton's surprise showed briefly before his warrior's mask returned. "You continue to be unexpected wooden fence woman." "Eliza," she corrected. "If we're to be married, you should at least use my name." "Eliza," he repeated, and somehow, in his voice, it sounded like both an ending and a beginning. Behind them, Rourke stood on his veranda, watching their dust trail disappear, his hands clenched and unclenched, already planning his next move in this deadly game. The woman had escaped him for now, but she'd also given him exactly what he needed: proof of Navajo interference in territorial affairs, grounds for the war he'd always intended. The red dust swirled between two worlds, and in its dancing patterns, the shape of coming sorrow could almost be seen. The wedding lodge stood apart from the main camp, constructed according to ancient traditions near a bend in the stream where cottonwoods offered shade. Eliza had spent the day in preparation with the women, her protests gently but firmly overruled as they dressed her in ceremonial garments, a woven dress of soft wool, dyed with natural colors that seemed to shift in the firelight. "You shake like aspen leaf," observed Maria Begay, the elder woman who had taken charge of her preparation. Despite her limited English, her meaning was clear. "This man, he is good man. He will not hurt you." Eliza nodded, though her trembling had little to do with fear of Chayton himself. It was the weight of the moment, the strange path that had led her here, standing at the threshold of a marriage she'd never imagined. The ceremony itself had been simple by Navajo standards, modified for the unusual circumstances. They'd shared corn pollen, had their wrists bound with woven cord, spoken words in Dunbizad that Maria had patiently taught her. The gathered witnesses, elders, warriors, curious children had watched with expressions ranging from approval to skepticism. Now, as purple dusk gave way to star-filled darkness, she stood alone in the wedding lodge, wrapped in a thin ceremonial blanket that Maria had called Nilchi, symbolizing the wind that would carry her old life away and bring her new one. The lodge flap lifted, and Chayton entered. Having shed his warrior's paint for simple clothing, he carried firewood, moving with deliberate calm as he built up the small fire in the center pit. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. "The people are satisfied," he said finally, not looking at her. "The marriage is recognized. Rourke cannot touch you now without bringing federal intervention." "And you?" Eliza asked softly. "Are you satisfied with this arrangement?" He paused in his work, firelight casting shadows across his angular features. "I did what was necessary, as did you." "That's not what I asked." Chayton finally met her eyes, and she saw something unexpected there: uncertainty, perhaps even vulnerability. "You stand there in the Nil Chai, as tradition demands. You spoke the words, shared the pollen. By our law, you are my wife. But you are also Bilagana white. You did not choose this path freely." "Freer than the choice Rourke offered," she countered. "A wolf or a snare, some choice." He added another branch to the fire. "I know what my people expect of this night, what your people would expect, but I made you a promise protection, not possession." The firelight danced across his face as he stood, and Eliza was struck by how young he looked without the warrior's mask, perhaps only a few years older than herself. The weight he carried showed in the set of his shoulders, the careful way he held himself distant. "Chaitin," she said, and he stilled at the sound of his name. "May I share something with you?" At his nod, she moved closer to the fire, still wrapped in the ceremonial blanket. "When I was 16, my mother died of fever. I held her hand through 3 days of delirium. Before the end, she told me something I've never forgotten. She said the hardest chains to break are the ones we forge ourselves from fear, from duty, from what others expect of us." She looked up at him. "I see those chains on you, the warrior who must be stone, the leader who cannot show doubt, the man who saves a woman but cannot let himself see her as anything but a burden to bear." "You are not a burden," he said quickly. "Then what am I?" The question hung between them like smoke. Chaitin moved to the other side of the fire, maintaining distance even as something in his expression shifted. "You are unexpected," he admitted. "When I watched you stand against that mob, speaking our language however poorly, protecting Ashki Yazi, I thought you were foolish, brave, but foolish. And now I think perhaps wisdom and foolishness are sisters who walk hand in hand." He paused. "You could have stayed silent, stayed safe. Instead, you chose to see justice done, even at great cost. This is not what I expected from the wooden fence people." Eliza felt the blanket slip slightly from her shoulders, but made no move to adjust it. "Just as protecting your enemy's daughter through marriage is not what I expected from a Navajo warrior. You were never my enemy." The words came soft, almost involuntary. "Even when I thought all Bilagana were the same, you were different." The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling upward. Outside, she could hear the distant sounds of the camp dogs barking, children being called to bed, the eternal whisper of wind through cottonwood leaves. "In my culture," Eliza said carefully, "a wedding night has certain expectations as well, but marriage should be built on choice, on mutual understanding, not on obligation or conquest." Chaitin moved then, but not toward her. He went to his pack and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. "Among my people, when a man takes a wife, he gives her something of value. Not as purchase, but as promise. This was my mother's." He unwrapped a necklace of silver and turquoise, the craftsmanship exquisite even in firelight. "She died in the Long Walk, when the army forced our people from these lands. My grandmother saved this, carried it hidden for 4 years in exile. It represents survival, return, hope for the future." "Chaitin, I cannot." "You can. You must. Tomorrow the people will look for signs that this marriage is real. This will be one such sign." He stood before her now, close enough that she could see the pulse at his throat. "May I?" She nodded, lifting her hair as he reached around to fasten the necklace. His fingers brushed her neck, and she felt him tremble, this warrior who had faced death without flinching. "There," he said, stepping back quickly. "It is done." Eliza touched the necklace, feeling the weight of history in its silver. "And what of tonight? What will your people expect to see come morning?" Color rose in his bronzed cheeks. "The women will check the blankets, as is custom. But there are ways. That is, I can—" He stopped, clearly uncomfortable. "You can make it appear that something occurred which did not—" "Yes." She studied him in the firelight, this man who had saved her life, bound himself to her, yet stood there looking as uncertain as a youth at his first dance. Something warm unfurled in her chest, unexpected and not unwelcome. "Or," she said softly, "we could simply talk, share stories, learn who we have bound ourselves to. Let understanding come before anything else." Relief washed across his features. "I would like that." He settled on one side of the fire, she on the other, the ceremonial blanket now wrapped more comfortably around her shoulders. and they talked carefully at first. Then, with growing ease, he told her of his childhood, learning to track with his grandfather, the joy of running free across the mesas. She spoke of Ohio, of green fields and rain, of her mother's gentle hands and her father's patient teaching. "Why did you really learn our language?" he asked as the fire burned lower. Sister Catherine had a Navajo woman working in the mission kitchen, Old Maria. She was called. She'd lost her family in the wars, had nowhere else to go. I was young, curious. I would sneak into the kitchen and listen to her sing while she worked. One day she caught me and laughed not unkindly. She said I had the ears of a crow, always listening. So she taught me words, just a few. Yaati for hello, ahehi for thank you, tu for water. "Your accent is terrible," he said, but he was smiling. "So I've been told," she smiled back. "What about you? Your English is nearly perfect." "The reservation school, for a time. Then traders, soldiers. Anyone who would teach me. My uncle said to fight an enemy, you must understand him. So I learned the white man's language, his writing, his laws." His expression darkened. "It has not stopped them from taking what they want." "No," she agreed softly. "But it helped you save me today. Knowledge used for protection instead of harm." They talked until the fire was embers, until Eliza's eyes grew heavy, without discussion. Chayton prepared a sleeping place for her near the warm stones, then laid his own blankets on the opposite side of the lodge. "Chayton," she called softly as he settled for sleep. "Yes. Thank you for giving me choice, for seeing me as a person, not a prize or a problem." In the darkness, his voice came warm. "Eliza." "Yes." "You are welcome in my lodge, tonight and all nights until you choose otherwise. This I swear, not as a warrior, but as your husband." She closed her eyes, feeling tears slip free not of sorrow, but of relief and something else, something that felt like the first green shoot after a long drought. When morning came and the women arrived to check the marriage lodge, they found what they expected to find. If they noticed that the bride's eyes were clear and rested, that she moved without pain or fear, they kept such observations to themselves. The silver and turquoise at her throat spoke its own truth. As Eliza emerged into the morning sun, she saw Ashki Yazi racing toward her, the blue cloth from her petticoat tied proudly around his arm. He skidded to a stop, suddenly shy, but she knelt and opened her arms. He flew into them, chattering in rapid Navajo. "He says you are his aunt now." Chayton translated, appearing beside them. "He wants to know if you will teach him the Bilagana words for things." "Tell him yes," Eliza said, still holding the boy. "Tell him we will teach each other." Chayton's hand briefly touched her shoulder, the first voluntary contact between them in daylight. "Come, the elders wish to speak with us. Rourke has not been idle in the night." As they walked toward the council lodge, Eliza noticed how the people watched them, some with acceptance, others with lingering suspicion. She lifted her chin, the turquoise necklace catching the sun. She had made her choice, strange and dangerous as it was. Now she would live it, one careful step at a time. Behind them, smoke still rose from the wedding lodge, carrying prayers and promises to the desert wind, and somewhere in that smoke, perhaps, the hope that two people from different worlds might find in each other not just sanctuary, but something deeper and more lasting than either had dared to imagine. The red earth beneath their feet seemed to hum with possibility, even as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The evidence lay scattered across the blanket like accusation-spent cartridges with military markings, a leather account book, water-stained but readable, and most damning of all, a silver flask engraved with the initials SR that Eliza had found half buried near the murdered ranch hands. "It's not enough," Chayton said, frustration evident in his voice. They sat in the shade of a rock overhang, 2 days' ride from the main camp, dust-covered and weary from their investigation. "A flask proves nothing," The cartridges could be stolen. The ledger only shows debts, not murder. Eliza studied the account book, her finger tracing columns of figures. Look closer. These aren't just debts, they're payments. To J.C. M.H.R.T. The same initials appear in the fort's duty roster that Mason slipped me. Rourke's been paying soldiers to look the other way, while he stages attacks to justify taking our water. Chayton's jaw tightened. But knowing and proving are different things. Your law requires more than truth. It requires witnesses willing to speak that truth. A dust devil whirled across the valley below, and Eliza remembered her mother's saying about chains. Sometimes the heaviest chains were those of fear, the fear that kept good people silent while evil flourished. Then we need to find someone whose fear of living with guilt outweighs their fear of Rourke. She looked at her husband. Strange how natural that word had become in just a week. What about Hensley? You saved his life. Maybe... Listen! Chayton held up his hand, head cocked. In the distance, Eliza heard it 2 hoofbeats, coming fast. They gathered the evidence quickly, Chayton readying his rifle while Eliza tucked the ledger inside her shirt. But the rider who appeared around the mesa wasn't one of Rourke's men. It was Sergeant Mason, his uniform dusty, his horse lathered with sweat. "Thank God I found you," he gasped, sliding from his saddle. "There's been another attack, but this time there are survivors, witnesses who saw the whole thing." "Where?" Chayton demanded. "The Patterson homestead, near Willow Springs. Family of 5 attacked at dawn. The parents were killed, but the 3 children hid in the root cellar. They saw the attackers, clearly white men dressed as Navajo, led by Jake Colton." Eliza felt her heart race. "The children are safe." "At the fort, under guard. But here's the thing, Colonel Morrison has gone to Fort Defiance for 2 weeks. Major Brennan is in temporary command." "Brennan?" Eliza's blood chilled. "Augustus Brennan. Rourke's cousin by marriage. He arrived yesterday with papers from the territorial governor." Mason's young face was grim. "He's already talking about decisive action against the hostiles. We need to move fast." They rode through the afternoon heat, pushing their horses hard. As they traveled, Mason filled them in on the chaos at the fort. Brennan had immediately begun issuing orders for increased patrols, specifically targeting Blue Mesa's approaches. "He's not even trying to investigate the attack properly," Mason said bitterly. "Claims the children are too traumatized to be reliable witnesses. Plans to ship them to an orphanage in Tucson tomorrow." "Over my dead body," Eliza muttered. They reached the fort as shadows lengthened, the adobe walls glowing orange in the sunset. Mason led them through a back entrance, avoiding the main gates where Brennan's loyal guards stood watch. The Patterson children huddled in a small room near the infirmary, 2 girls and a boy, the eldest perhaps 12. Their faces were streaked with tears and dirt, eyes hollow with shock. "It's all right," Eliza said gently, kneeling before them. "You're safe now. I'm Mrs." She hesitated, then forged ahead. "I'm Mrs. Tubai. This is my husband, and this is Sergeant Mason. We want to help." The eldest, a girl with tangled brown hair, looked up. "They killed Ma and Pa, made it look like Indians, but they weren't. I saw Mr. Colton clear as day. He was laughing when he—" She broke off, fresh tears flowing. "You were very brave," Chayton said softly. His presence might have frightened them, but something in his voice, the contained sorrow of one who had also lost family, seemed to reach them. "Your parents would be proud. Now we need you to be brave once more. Will you tell the truth to people who can stop these men?" The boy, perhaps 8, piped up. "Mr. Colton said if we told, he'd come back and finish what he started." "He won't." Eliza's voice carried steel beneath its gentleness. "I promise you that." Mason cleared his throat. "There's more. I searched Brennan's quarters while he was at dinner. Found this." He produced a folded paper. "Transfer orders for 2 companies of cavalry to Blue Mesa, dated for next week, and a surveyor's map dividing the Navajo water rights into parcels for sale." They're not even waiting for an excuse anymore. Chayton observed. We need to get these children somewhere safe, Eliza said. And we need... The door burst open. Major Brennan stood there, flanked by armed soldiers, his fleshy face red with anger. Arrest them all. The savage for trespassing on federal property, the woman for aiding enemies of the territory, and Sergeant Mason for dereliction of duty. You can't, Mason started. I am in command here, Brennan barked. Take them. But as the soldiers moved forward, the eldest Patterson girl stood up. No, her voice cracked but carried. These people are trying to help us. You're the one working with the murderers. Brennan's face darkened. The child is clearly hysterical. Sergeant Willis, escort these orphans to the wagon. They'll leave for Tucson immediately. It's after dark, sir, one of the soldiers said uncertainly. Regulations state. I give the orders here. In the confusion that followed, Eliza caught Chayton's eye. He gave an almost imperceptible nod. As soldiers reached for the children, Chayton moved not violently, but with the fluid motion of water finding its course. Suddenly, he stood between the children and the soldiers, Mason at his side. These children are witnesses to a crime, Mason stated loudly. Military law requires their testimony be recorded before any transfer. I decide what military law requires, Brennan snarled. No, sir, you don't. This from an unexpected source, Corporal Davies, one of the soldiers Brennan had brought. My brother was at the Patterson place last week, helping them dig a new well. Good people. If someone killed them, their children deserve justice. Other soldiers shifted uneasily. The fort was small. Many knew the Patterson family. The mood in the room changed, authority fracturing along lines of conscience. Brennan sensed it too. Fine. Record their statements. Then they leave. He pointed at Eliza and Chayton. These two remain under arrest. On what charges? Eliza demanded. I'll think of something. Brennan's smile was cold. Guards, take them to the stockade. As they were led away, Eliza heard the eldest Patterson girl's voice, clear and strong, beginning her testimony. It was a small victory, but perhaps enough. The stockade was a single stone building with barred windows. They were placed in adjacent cells, Mason in a third. As the guards left, Eliza pressed against the bars separating her from Chayton. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've made things worse. No. His hand found hers through the bars. You did what was right. The children will testify. The truth will be heard. By Brennan, he'll bury it. Perhaps. But Davies heard. Others heard. Truth is like water, it finds its way through the smallest cracks. In the darkness, his fingers interlaced with hers, they stayed that way, drawing comfort from touch, from the knowledge that neither stood alone. Near midnight, they heard commotion in the courtyard. Horses, many of them, and raised voices. Then footsteps approaching the stockade. The door opened to reveal Colonel Morrison himself, travel-stained and furious, with Davies and several other soldiers behind him. Release them immediately, he ordered the startled guard. And someone explained to me why I had to ride through the night because Corporal Davies sent word that my fort had been turned into a carnival of corruption. As they emerged from the cells, Morrison fixed them with a stern gaze. You three have 1 hour to present your evidence. Make it count. They made it count. The Patterson children's testimony, the physical evidence, Mason's documentation of irregularities, even Davies's courage in sending for Morrison, it all painted a damning picture. By dawn, Brennan was under arrest. Colton was being hunted by a patrol, and Morrison had sent urgent dispatches to Fort Defiance requesting a full investigation of Silas Rourke. It's not over, Morrison warned as Eliza and Chayton prepared to leave. Rourke has powerful friends. This will get worse before it gets better. But the children are safe, Eliza asked. I'll personally ensure they reach their aunt in California. You have my word. As they rode away from the fort, The rising sun painted the desert in shades of gold and rose. Eliza swayed in her saddle, exhaustion finally catching up. "You did well," Chayton said quietly. "Like a warrior." She managed a tired smile. "I had a good teacher." "Eliza," he reined his horse closer, "when you took my hand in that cell?" "Yes." He seemed to struggle for words. "Among my people. Such gestures have meaning, to offer comfort in darkness. To stand together against injustice, these create bonds deeper than ceremony." She met his gaze steadily. "I know. Do you?" Instead of answering, she reached across the space between their horses, her fingers finding his. They rode that way for a time, hands linked, hearts beginning to open like desert flowers after rain. But behind them, storm clouds gathered. In his study, Silas Rourke read Morrison's dispatch with cold fury. If the law would not serve his purposes, perhaps it was time to abandon law altogether. He reached for paper and pen, beginning a letter that would summon hard men from dark places. The battle for Blue Mesa, and for the fragile connection between a wooden fence woman and a Navajo warrior, was far from over. The gathering at Blue Mesa drew people from across the territory, Navajo from distant clans, settlers from Juniper Falls and beyond, soldiers from the fort, all converging on the sacred springs for what many believed would be the final confrontation. Colonel Morrison had proposed it as a peace council, but everyone knew it was truly a trial with water rights and justice itself hanging in the balance. Eliza stood beside Chayton at the edge of the natural amphitheater formed by the red rocks, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what they'd planned. In her saddlebag lay the evidence they'd gathered, including a new piece that had arrived just that morning, Carl Hensley's written confession, delivered by Doc Weatherby. "He's dying," the doctor had explained quietly. "The bone fever took hold, said he couldn't meet his maker with the lies on his conscience, wrote it all down, Rourke's payments, the staged attacks, even named the men involved." Now, as hundreds gathered under the vast desert sky, Silas Rourke sat on a makeshift platform with his lawyers and supporters, looking confident despite the charges against him. He'd arrived with 30 armed men, just within the limit Morrison had set for personal protection. Ugh. "Let's get this farce over with," Rourke called out, his voice carrying across the natural bowl. "I've been accused of crimes by savages and their white woman. I demand the right to face my accusers." Morrison, acting as mediator, nodded to Chayton and Eliza. As they stepped forward, Eliza noticed movement in the crowd, her father pushing through, his face drawn with worry but determined. "Pa," she whispered as he reached them, "you shouldn't have come. It's dangerous." "You think I'd miss seeing my daughter fight for what's right?" Thomas Whitmore's calloused hand briefly squeezed hers. "Your mother would be proud. Lizzie, as am I." The proceedings began with Mason presenting the military's findings. He laid out the evidence methodically, the staged attacks, the false reports, the attempts to manipulate federal policy. The crowd listened in tense silence, punctuated by angry mutters from both sides. Then Eliza took the center, Hensley's confession in hand. Her voice started quiet but grew stronger as she read his words. "I hereby confess that I participated in the murder of James Patterson and his wife on the orders of Silas Rourke, who paid me $50 to make it appear as savage Indian work." "Lies," Rourke surged to his feet. "The dying ravings of a man poisoned by Indian medicine. This woman has bewitched him as she's bewitched others." "Then let's hear from the living," Morrison interjected. He signaled to his men, who brought forward 3 of Rourke's former employees, men who'd been arrested trying to flee the territory. "These gentlemen have agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences." What followed was damning, one by one. The men detailed Rourke's schemes, his obsession with Blue Mesa's water, his willingness to spill innocent blood for profit. The crowd's mood shifted like a tide. even some of Rourke's supporters looking uncomfortable. But Rourke wasn't finished. He stood again, his silver beard catching the light, looking every inch the successful businessman wronged by lesser men. Even if these accusations were true, which I deny, I ask you all to consider the greater good. This water could transform the territory, bring prosperity to thousands. Instead, it's hoarded by a handful of savages who contribute nothing to civilization. Is that justice? It is their water by treaty and by right, Chayton responded, his voice carrying quiet authority. As your own laws acknowledge, laws can change, should change, when they no longer serve progress. Rourke's pale eyes swept the mixed crowd. How many of you have lost cattle to drought? How many have watched crops fail for want of irrigation? This woman, he pointed at Eliza, has chosen them over her own kind. She shares their blankets, bears their marks. Can you trust the word of such a creature? The insult hung in the air like a challenge. Eliza felt Chayton tense beside her, saw hands move to weapons throughout the crowd. This was the moment Rourke wanted violence that would justify everything. Yes, I chose, Eliza said, stepping forward before anyone could react. I chose justice over greed. I chose truth over comfortable lies. And I chose to see the Dain not as savages, but as people defending their homeland against thieves who hide behind the mask of civilization. She reached up, touching the turquoise necklace at her throat. This was given to me by a man who could have sought revenge for all the wrongs done to his people. Instead, he chose law, chose peace, chose to protect even those who might be his enemies, because it was right. Pretty words, Rourke sneered. But words won't water cattle or feed families. No, but these will. This from an unexpected source, Judge Harwick, the same man who had been prepared to marry Eliza off by force. He stood, pulling documents from his coat. Mr. Rourke, I've spent considerable time reviewing your land holdings and water claims. Interesting discoveries, such as the fact that you've been selling water rights you don't own to investors back east. The judge produced telegrams, receipts, certificates, evidence of fraud that had nothing to do with the murders but everything to do with Rourke's character. Gentlemen who paid thousands for shares in your Blue Mesa Development Company will be very interested to learn the springs were never yours to sell. The crowd erupted. Rourke's investors, men who'd backed him thinking to profit from development, shouted accusations. His political allies stepped away, suddenly finding anywhere else to look. In minutes, his careful coalition fragmented like sandstone in rain. This is conspiracy, Rourke's composure finally cracked. You've all been deceived by... The shot came from the rocks above, sharp, echoing, unmistakable. Rourke spun and fell, blood spreading across his white shirt. Screams erupted as people dove for cover, but no second shot came. Chayton reacted first, racing up the rocks with several warriors. They found the shooter quickly. Jake Colton, drunk and defiant, still holding the smoking rifle. Couldn't let him talk. Colton slurred as they bound him. Promised too much gold to too many people. Would have dragged us all down with him. Below, Doc Weatherby worked frantically over Rourke, but the land baron's pale eyes were already glazing. With his last breath, he gasped out words that might have been a confession or a curse no one could say for certain. Colonel Morrison restored order with remarkable efficiency, his soldiers disarming Rourke's leaderless men and taking Colton into custody. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, he addressed the stunned gathering. Let this be the end of it, he said firmly. The evidence is clear. Silas Rourke orchestrated murders and fraud to steal what wasn't his death, while denying us formal justice. Perhaps serves a rough justice of its own. The water rights of Blue Mesa remain with the Navajo people, as treaty law demands. Any who dispute this will answer to federal authority. The crowd began to disperse slowly, quietly, sobered by how quickly violence had shattered the day's careful proceedings. But something had shifted. Settlers who had never spoken to their Navajo neighbors exchanged nods. A few even approached to trade water from the springs for grain and goods, beginning what would become regular commerce. As twilight painted the rocks in shades of purple and gold, Eliza stood with Chayton beside the springs themselves. The water bubbled up clear and constant, indifferent to human conflict, following paths it had carved over centuries. "Your courage today," Chayton began, then stopped, seeming to search for words. "Was no greater than yours," she finished. "We stood together, fought for truth together." "Together," he repeated softly. His hand found hers, and this time there was no hesitation in the touch. "Eliza, when this began, our marriage was protection, necessity. But now, she turned to face him fully, seeing in his eyes what her heart had known for days. "Now I find myself hoping you will not ask to dissolve it when the danger passes. That you might choose to stay, not from need, but from love." The word hung between them like a promise. "Is it too soon to speak of such things, your world and mine?" "Are becoming one world," she interrupted gently. "At least here, in this place, with these people, with you." He drew her close then, and she went willingly, feeling the solid strength of him, the steady beat of his heart. Around them, the springs sang their eternal song, and for a moment the desert held its breath. "I need to tell you something," she whispered against his chest. "That first night, in the wedding lodge, when you promised to wait until I called your name, I almost did. Almost asked you to truly make me your wife. Only pride held me back." His arms tightened around her. "And now I know that pride is a cold companion compared to what we could share." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "Chayton, my husband, I choose you, not for protection or politics, but because my heart has found its home with yours." The kiss that followed tasted of promise and new beginnings, witnessed by ancient stones and eternal waters. When they finally parted, both were breathless, and Eliza saw her wonder reflected in his dark eyes. "The lodge awaits," he said softly. "If you're certain." "I've never been more certain of anything." As they walked back toward the camp, hands entwined, they passed Sergeant Mason talking earnestly with one of the Navajo maidens who'd been teaching Eliza to weave. Ashki Yazi raced by, playing tag with settler children, the blue cloth still tied proudly to his arm. Changes, Eliza thought, small ones and large, personal and communal, all flowing together like streams joining a river. The violence wasn't truly over there, would be other Rourkes, other conflicts. But today, justice had prevailed. Truth had been heard, and two hearts had found the courage to bridge worlds with love. The stars emerged one by one as they reached the wedding lodge, and Eliza paused at the threshold. This time, she entered not as a frightened bride seeking shelter, but as a woman choosing her destiny. The ceremonial blanket awaited. But now it symbolized not just transformation, but the deliberate weaving together of two lives, two cultures, two hearts that had discovered they beat as one. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in the glow of the fire and the shelter of their love, the world held only promise. The weeks following Rourke's death brought changes that rippled across the territory like rings in still water. At Blue Mesa, a new rhythm emerged: Navajo shepherds and settler farmers working out water-sharing agreements, children from both communities playing together by the springs. And at the center of it all, Eliza finding her place in this merged world. She sat in the shade of the Ramada, working on a weaving project under Maria Begue's patient instruction. Her fingers, once skilled only with needle and thread, now worked the wool with growing confidence. The pattern emerging was her own design, a blend of traditional Navajo motifs and something uniquely hers. "Better," Maria nodded approvingly. "Your hands learn the language of the loom." Through the open side of the shelter, Eliza could see Chayton conferring with Colonel Morrison and several clan elders. They'd been meeting for 3 days, hammering out formal water-sharing agreements that would stand in law as well as custom. Her husband, how that word still sent warmth through her, had proven as skilled at diplomacy as warfare. "Your man. He speaks well for the people," Maria observed, following her gaze. "But his eyes, they always find you, like hawk returning to nest." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. The older woman chuckled. "Is good. Strong marriage needs such looking, such finding." A rider approaching the camp drew their attention, Thomas Whitmore, his monthly visit that had become a cherished routine. Eliza rose eagerly, setting aside her weaving to meet him. "Pa!" She embraced him, breathing in the familiar scents of sawdust and pipe tobacco. "Let me look at you, Lizzie." He held her at arm's length, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "You're glowing, daughter. This life agrees with you." "It does." She linked her arm through his as they walked. "Though I miss you. How's the workshop?" "Busier than ever, with peace holding. More families are settling. Just finished a schoolhouse, going to have a proper teacher and everything." He paused. "Could use some desks. Thought maybe your husband's people might have ideas about design that would work for both settler and native children." "I'll ask. Oh, Pa, that's wonderful, a real school." They found a quiet spot by the springs where they could talk freely. Thomas pulled out a packet of letters correspondence from Ohio relatives. News from the wider world. But Eliza noticed he held one back, his expression troubled. "What is it?" she asked. "Letter came from a lawyer in Tucson. Seems Rourke had a brother back east. He's coming to settle the estate and—" Thomas hesitated. "He's questioning the legality of your marriage. Claims that as a white woman, you can't legally bind yourself in a native ceremony." Eliza's stomach tightened. "But Colonel Morrison witnessed it. The federal authorities recognize it." "I know. But this brother Aldous Rourke, he's got political connections. There's talk he might petition the territorial governor to investigate." Thomas took her hands. "I wanted you to know, to be prepared." "Does Chayton know?" "Morrison's telling him now. I expect—" Eliza stood abruptly, pacing to the water's edge. After all they'd overcome, to face this new threat to their happiness. "Lizzie," her father joined her. "Whatever comes, we'll face it. You've got friends now both sides of the divide. Judge Harwick even said he'd testify to the marriage's validity if needed." "Judge Harwick!" She couldn't hide her surprise. "Man's had a change of heart since Rourke's true nature came out. Been working to make amends for his part in things." Thomas squeezed her shoulder. "Don't borrow trouble. Just be ready." That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the desert, Eliza found Chayton sitting alone on a rise overlooking the camp. She settled beside him, neither speaking for long moments. "You know about the brother," she finally said. "Yes. And—" He turned to her, and she saw not worry but determination in his dark eyes. "Let him come. Our marriage stands in the eyes of the people and the Federals. More importantly, it stands in our hearts. But if he finds some legal technicality, then we'll marry again and again, if necessary, in your church, before your judge. However many times it takes until even the most stubborn Bilagana understands that you are my wife and I am your husband." The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her throat tight with emotion. "You would do that, stand in a white man's church, speak their vows." "I would walk through fire for you. Eliza, a church seems far less daunting." She leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I love you," she whispered. "I didn't know it was possible to love someone this much." His arm came around her, pulling her close. "Among my people, we have a saying, Ayor Anoshni. It means, I will love you always. But also, you are the one I will love. Past, present, future, all contained in one truth." "Ayor Anoshni," she repeated carefully. Your pronunciation is still terrible, he said, but his voice was warm with affection. Then you'll have to keep teaching me. She tilted her face up to his. Every day, for as long as we have. The kiss they shared held promise and passion, a claiming and being claimed that went beyond any law or ceremony. When they finally parted, stars had begun to emerge in the darkening sky. There's something else, Chayton said. Something I've been waiting to tell you at the right moment. What? The council has decided to establish a trading post at Blue Mesa, a permanent structure where both peoples can meet, trade, share water according to the new agreements. They've asked me to oversee it. But... He paused. They also suggested that my wife, with her knowledge of both worlds, might be the better choice to run such an enterprise. Eliza sat up straighter. Me run a trading post. You speak both languages, understand both peoples. You read, write, keep accounts. You've already been teaching the children native and settler alike. Who better to build bridges through commerce? The idea took her breath away. Not just living between two worlds, but actively working to connect them. Do you think I could? I think you could do anything you set your mind to. His faith in her was humbling. We could do it together, she said slowly, the vision taking shape. You handling the protection, the negotiations with the clans, me managing the trade, the school for children. Pa could help build it. He's always wanted to see different construction techniques. And Sergeant Mason has been courting Standing Dove rather persistently. He might be convinced to take a post here, providing military liaison. They talked long into the night, planning and dreaming. A future neither could have imagined months ago now seemed not just possible but inevitable. 3 days later, Aldous Rourke arrived. Where his brother had been calculating ice, Aldous was blustering fire. He swept into Juniper Falls with a retinue of lawyers and demanded immediate meetings with every authority figure he could find. Within hours, he'd made himself thoroughly disliked. The man's a fool, Colonel Morrison told Chayton and Eliza after a particularly trying session. He thinks bluster can overturn federal treaty law. Judge Harwick practically threw him out of chambers. But fools could be dangerous, especially wealthy ones. Aldous began spreading money around, trying to buy testimony that the marriage was coerced, that Eliza was being held against her will. The response from the community surprised everyone, perhaps most of all, Eliza herself. Settlers who had once viewed her with suspicion now spoke up in her defense. The Patterson children, safe with their aunt but writing letters, testified to her courage. Even Carl Hensley, dying but determined, dictated a statement about her integrity. The final blow to Aldous came from an unexpected source, Augustus Brennan, broken by his arrest and facing federal charges, offered to testify about the attempted forced marriage, making it clear who the real coercers had been. Standing in the half-built trading post, watching Navajo and settler working side by side on construction, Eliza felt a hand slip into hers. She turned to find Ashki Yazi, the blue cloth still on his arm, but now accompanied by other decorations beads she'd taught him to string. A small carved horse Thomas had made for him. "Auntie," he said in careful English, "will the bad man take you away?" She knelt to his level. "No, little warrior. This is my home now. Our home. No one can take that away." "Promise." "I promise." As if to seal that promise, the sound of singing rose from where the women worked, Navajo and settler voices joining in a work song that somehow bridged languages. The trading post walls rose steady and sure, built on foundations deeper than stone. That evening, as orange light painted the desert, Aldous Rourke departed as suddenly as he'd come, faced with unified opposition and the prospect of expensive, unwinnable legal battles. He'd chosen to cut his losses. The brother's estate would be sold to pay debts and compensate victims. The threat had passed like a summer storm, violent but brief, leaving the air clearer in its wake. "It's over," Eliza breathed, watching his carriage disappear into the distance. "No," Chayton corrected gently. It's beginning. He was right. Before them lay the challenge and promise of the trading post, of the school, of a life built on bridging worlds. There would be other conflicts, other tests, but they would face them together, rooted in love and purpose like the cottonwoods by the spring. As stars emerged one by one in the vast desert sky, Eliza touched the turquoise at her throat and smiled. She had found her place at last, not fully Navajo. Not quite the settler she'd been, but something new, something needed, something that felt exactly like home. The Blue Mesa trading post stood complete under the endless Arizona sky, its adobe walls warm in the morning sun. 2 years had passed since its foundation was laid, and in that time it had become far more than anyone had initially envisioned, part general store, part school, part neutral meeting ground where old wounds slowly healed. Eliza stood behind the counter, tallying the week's accounts. When the bell above the door chimed, she looked up to see a sight that had become wonderfully common, a mixed group of children racing in, settler and Navajo together, chattering excitedly about their discovery. "Mrs. Tubai, we found tracks by the Wash Mountain Lion. Jesse says, but Ashki thinks it's just a big dog." "Did you follow proper safety rules?" she asked, setting down her pen. "Yes, ma'am," they chorused. "Stayed together, told an adult, didn't go past the marked rocks." "Good. Now, let's see what the tracking book says about identifying prints." As she pulled down the reference guide, one of dozens she'd ordered from back east, Eliza caught sight of herself in the glass window. The woman reflected there bore little resemblance to the frightened carpenter's daughter who'd arrived in Juniper Falls years ago. Her skin was sun-touched, her hair braided in a practical style that blended both cultures. The turquoise necklace still rested at her throat, joined now by her mother's cameo past and present, united. "The children learn well," a familiar voice said from the doorway. Chayton entered, carrying fresh game from the morning hunt. At 35, he moved with the same fluid grace that had first caught her attention, though silver now touched his temples. "They have good teachers," she replied, smiling as he leaned across the counter to kiss her cheek. "All of them. Speaking of which, Standing Dove says the weaving circle wants to know if you'll demonstrate that new pattern next week. If I can manage it between the school lessons, the supply orders, and keeping you out of trouble," she teased. "I'm not the one who faced down those claim jumpers last month with nothing but a ledger book and strong language." It worked, didn't it? Their banter was interrupted by the arrival of Thomas Whitmore, moving slower these days but still spry enough to oversee construction projects. With him was Sergeant now Lieutenant Mason, who'd married Standing Dove the previous spring in a ceremony that beautifully merged traditions. "Morning, Lizzie, Chayton." Thomas greeted them. "Got news from the territorial capital. They've approved funding for the expanded school building." Eliza's hand flew to her heart. "Truly?" 3 rooms, proper desks, and salary for 2 teachers. Mason confirmed. "Seems your letters to the education board finally broke through." "Our letters," she corrected, glancing at Chayton. Every petition had both our names, and half the territory's signatures by the end. Thomas added proudly, "Navajo and settler alike." As they discussed building plans, Eliza noticed more people gathering outside. Today was water distribution day, when the careful allotments were measured out according to the agreements forged in the wake of Rourke's fall. What had begun as a tense necessity had evolved into something resembling a social event, with families sharing news and food while waiting their turn. "I should help with the distribution," Chayton said, reading her glance. "And I should finish these accounts before the supply wagon arrives." But neither moved immediately, caught in one of those moments of perfect contentment that still surprised them both. The peace was broken by young Ashki Yazi, now 12, and sprouting like spring grass bursting through the door. Uncle-aunt riders coming from the south, many of them. Old instincts flared. Chayton's hand went to his rifle, while Eliza began mentally cataloging who was where, which children needed gathering. But Ashki was grinning. It's a wedding party. They carry blue flags. Tension melted into curiosity. Blue flags meant peaceful intentions, and wedding parties were always welcome. Within an hour, the trading post grounds were crowded with the new arrivals, a Hopi clan traveling to visit relatives, their path taking them by Blue Mesa's reliable water. What followed was one of those spontaneous celebrations that had become the trading post's hallmark. The travelers shared news from the south, traded goods, and joined the water distribution with gracious thanks. Someone produced a fiddle, another drums, and soon music filled the air, an improbable blend of traditions that somehow worked. Eliza found herself teaching dance steps to Hopi children, while their mothers examined her hybrid weaving patterns with professional interest. Chayton was deep in conversation with the clan leaders about trail conditions and weather patterns. The sight filled her with quiet pride. This was what they'd built together, understanding woven as tightly as any blanket. As sunset painted the desert in shades of fire, the celebration wound down. The Hopi would camp nearby tonight, refill their water stores in the morning, and continue their journey. But they'd leave carrying stories of the place where enemies had become allies, where water was shared fairly, where children learned side by side regardless of their origins. Tired? Chayton asked, finding Eliza sitting on their favorite bench overlooking the springs. Pleasantly so. She leaned into him as he sat beside her. Days like this make everything worthwhile, all the struggles, the danger, the uncertainty. No regrets. She considered the question seriously, as she always did when he asked. Her life had taken turns she never could have imagined. She'd lost the simple certainty of her childhood world, but gained something far richer, a life of purpose, of bridging worlds, of love that transcended every boundary. Not one, she said firmly. Well, perhaps one. His eyebrow raised in question. I regret that my mother never got to see this. She would have been so proud of the school, the trading post, the peace we've helped build, and... She hesitated, then placed his hand on her still flat stomach. She would have loved knowing about this. Chayton went very still. Eliza, are you saying... Doc Weatherby confirmed it yesterday. Come spring, there'll be another little bridge builder joining our world. The joy that transformed his face was worth her careful secret-keeping. He pulled her close, murmuring endearments in both languages, his usual warrior's composure completely forgotten. Have you thought of names? He asked when he could speak clearly again. If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Mary, for my mother, but also Maria, for the woman who's taught me so much. And if a boy, then you choose. Something that honors both paths he'll walk. They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged in the darkening sky. In the distance, coyotes called to each other across the mesas, their wild song a reminder that for all the changes, this was still untamed land that demanded respect. Eliza, Chayton said suddenly, that first day, when you stood between Ashki and the mob, did you know how much that moment would change? I knew it was right, she replied. Sometimes that's all we can know. The rest we build one day at a time. Like the trading post. Like our life together. She turned in his arms to face him fully. We've built something good here, haven't we? Something that will last. Look around, he said softly. Listen, children playing without fear, water shared in peace. Knowledge exchanged freely. Yes, my heart, we've built something that will last, and now, his hand covered hers on her stomach. Now we'll build it even stronger for those who come after. As if summoned by his words, shooting stars began to streak across the sky, a celestial celebration of life's continuous renewal. Eliza made wishes on each one, not for herself, but for the child growing within her. For all the children who would learn and grow in this place of convergence. The next morning brought its usual bustle supply wagons to unload, lessons to teach, disputes to mediate, water to distribute. But now each ordinary task carried extra significance. building the foundation for the next generation. Standing in the doorway of the trading post, watching Navajo and settler children chase lizards together while their parents discussed the autumn harvest. Eliza touched the turquoise at her throat and smiled. The red dust that had once seemed like a curse now felt like a blessing, binding them all to this land and to each other. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the sacred mountains, promising the rain that would renew the desert. But here at Blue Mesa, renewal was already a daily miracle, measured not in drops of water but in small acts of trust, in laughter shared across old divides, in the steady work of building a world where different could also mean stronger. The story that had begun with fear and conflict had transformed into something neither Chayton nor Eliza could have imagined, not an ending, but an eternal beginning. Each day writing new chapters in the saga of the American frontier. And at the heart of it all, the springs of Blue Mesa continued their ancient song, witnessing and blessing the endless capacity of the human heart to bridge any divide with love. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and exchange thoughts about Eliza and Chayton's journey. If you enjoyed this Wild West love story, please subscribe to Wild West Tales, give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover this heartfelt frontier romance. Your support means the world and helps these stories reach fellow lovers of Western tales. Until next time, partners.